See, last week we were in Acts chapter 4, and this was right after Peter and John were arrested and told not to speak of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then when they were released from jail, they went back and told the other believers, and the believers began to pray. And in their prayer, we saw the example of some things that we can do in our prayer life, as we talked about last week. But we also talked about the unity that they had in coming together as believers in order to ask God to do the things that they couldn't do on their own. If we look at chapter 4, verses 34 through 37, it says, there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned lands or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone as he had need. Joseph, a Levite from Cyprus, whom the apostle called Barnabas, which means sons of encouragement, and we're going to hear more about Barnabas later in the book of Acts. He sold a field he owned and brought the money and put it at the apostles' feet. And so here we are seeing the unity that the church had, that they said, you know what, I know this belongs to me, but because I am committed to the gospel, I'm committed to Jesus Christ, and I want others to know and understand who he is, I'm going to do what I can to support the ministry that God has put in front of us. So this land that I have, I'm going to go ahead and sell it. That does not mean everybody's going to have to sell the land that they own. But they did that from time to time, which means that when they knew something was needed, they sought God. You cannot tell me they didn't seek God before they did those things and made those decisions. Those are some big decisions. So that's what they did. And they were united in that. And they took care of all the needs of the people around them. If every church in Lafayette, Louisiana took care of the people within their vicinity, Lafayette, Louisiana would look a whole lot different. That's what they did. And so today, as we see after Barnabas, who's someone we're going to hear about later, sold a field, brought the money, put it at the apostles' feet, we see his generosity. We see him, someone who later we'll see how important he was in this book, is who we now get to compare where we're going. This person that we're going to be talking about today too. Which is again where this title came from. Being selfish has got to go. So we're going to start in Acts chapter 5, verse 1. We're going to read through that whole passage, and then we're going 1 through 16. We're going to read through that, and then we're going to break that down. So as we start in verse 1, see, we just heard about Barnabas, who sold a field, brought the prophets, brought that to the apostles' feet. And so in verse 1 it says, now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. Then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Didn't it belong to you before it was sold, and after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not lied to men, but to God. When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died, and great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Verse 6. Then the young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? Yes, she said, that's the price. Verse 9, Peter said to her, how could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they'll carry you out also. At that moment she fell down at his feet and died. Then the young men came in, and finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. The apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders among the people, and all the believers used to meet together in Solomon's colonnade. No one else dared join them, even though they were highly regarded by the people. Nevertheless, more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. As a result, people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats, so that at least Peter's shadow might fall on some of them as he passed by. Verse 16, crowds gathered also from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those tormented by evil spirits, and all of them were healed. So again, we just saw Barnabas, who was generous, who sold his property and brought the proceeds to the apostles' feet. So now we move into a place where we see the opposite of that through Ananias and his wife Sapphira. And so as we talk about that, and you think about Ananias and Sapphira, I need you to remember something. Well, before I tell you what I need you to remember, I want you to take a look. If you have a bulletin, there are some little outlines in there. If you'd like to follow along and fill those out, you can. And if you don't have one and would like one, if you raise your hand, I'll get one to you, please. So this is just one way that we can help you, because sometimes for me it's easier to follow along as I can write and take notes, and I love taking notes. Even my Bible is not nice and pretty. It's got different color ink pens because sometimes I have blue, sometimes I have black, but those outlines are important for us as we can take the sermon home and study that. And so one of the things that we must remember when we think about Ananias and Sapphira, because we know they did something that sometimes we would think we wouldn't do, but we all have a tendency to be selfish. Every single one of us has a tendency to be selfish. Is there anyone in here that doesn't? See, we all can agree on that. We all have a tendency to be selfish, because that's what happened with Ananias and Sapphira. In verse 1, they said, now a man named Ananias, together with his wife Sapphira, also sold a piece of property. With his wife's full knowledge, he kept back part of the money for himself, but brought the rest and put it at the apostles' feet. See, as we think about that, many times when we read things like that, it's like, how horrible was that they lied for something that they were supposed to be doing for God? We think about them and put them in a different category than we are, but how often do we become selfish, and rather than doing what we know God needs us to do, we do something even just a little bit different? That's what they did. See, we all have a tendency to be selfish. So we can't go saying how horrible they were, because we're just like them. And one of the reasons we know we're just like them is because we need Jesus just like them. Because we all want things for ourselves. Sometimes just having something for ourselves feels good. It's nice. Especially if the enemy gets into our heads and tells us we really need it and God doesn't. So we know that we all have that tendency. We know that many times the things that happen in our lives or the issues that come up in our lives are because we're being selfish. And that's what happened with Ananias and Sapphira. But there's something that happens when we become selfish. See, that our being selfish leads us to do something that goes against God. It leads us to sin. Each one of us, when we're being selfish, it leads us to a place that God usually doesn't want us to go, and that's into being selfish. That's what we see that happens to Ananias here. In verses 3 through 6, it says, Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has filled your heart so that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself money, some of the money you received for the land? He didn't say you lied to me. He said you lied to the Holy Spirit. I'm not concerned with you being honest. You might need to be concerned with the one that has control over what happens to you for eternity. You didn't lie to me, you lied to him. See, Barnabas' heart was good and was whole and pure, so he brought everything, but Ananias brought only a little bit and kept some. And so Peter's just addressing him directly. Didn't it all belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? Here he goes again. You have not lied to men, but to who? He lied to God. And when Ananias heard this, he fell down and died. The wages of sin is what? Death. Not always physical death for us, but in this case, it was physical death. That's why I say not always physical death. Sometimes the wages of our sin is physical death. But here for us it's a spiritual death more often. But here it's a physical death. And then it says, in great fear seized all who heard what happened. And then the young men came forward and wrapped up his body and carried him out and buried him. See, being selfish, thinking just about ourselves, in most cases lead us to sin. It may in all cases, but I'll say in most cases, just in case, there's always that exception, right? In most cases, being selfish leads us to sin. Ananias lied. We lied. And when you think about those little white lies that we sometimes tell, and I know we all do it, it's like a white lie is still what? A lie. But for us, we've been conditioned to think that those are okay. I'm not going to address that if your wife says, does this make me look fat? Or maybe your friend says, does this make me look thin? Because those are, but again, those questions, I'll say it to this, look, I'm gonna go the opposite way. If you don't want to hear the truth, don't ask the question. And I just said, because a lot of people, that's the joke that comes up. When your wife asks if she looks fat, you better not say she does. But your wife also needs to understand, if you're going to ask a question and you want your husband to be honest with you, accept the answer. That's all I'm going to say to that. But we all have those white lies that we tell because we don't think it hurts anyone. A white lie is still a lie. See, when we're selfish, we bring all that stuff on ourselves. See, in James chapter 1, verses 13 through 16, it tells us, when tempted, no one should say, God's tempted me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. Why would a good God put something evil, something that could lead to death in front of us? Why does the God who wants to save us from death want to encourage us and entice us with death? God doesn't do that. Each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed. Our evil desires from our selfishness. Then after that desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and my dear sisters. See, our selfishness leads to sin. Our selfishness leads to our spiritual death. That doesn't come from God, that comes from us. But our selfishness doesn't just affect us either, does it? Being selfish hurts us and it hurts others. Being selfish hurts us and it hurts other people. How many of you have ever done anything that has never impacted anyone other than you? Every decision, every choice that we make affects us and somebody else. Sometimes those things may not affect us or other people for a long, long time. But everything that we do impacts other people or affects other people. We speed down Johnson Street. We run a red light. Somebody's light's green and they're moving. We don't think about it at the time, but if we're running a red light and somebody else's light's green, what's most likely to happen? Yeah, but it's not that big a deal. I got to get where I got to go. That doesn't affect anyone but me. I need to be somewhere. Or maybe it's that you saw something happen, and I was thinking about that. We were at the Youngsville Mardi Gras parade yesterday, and I'm going, all of these cars moving around, and at the end of the parade, it's chaos in Youngsville. I'll tell you, stay away from Youngsville. I'm saying, I said, if I'm walking down the street, and there's some people, and I literally thought about this when I was walking my dog yesterday. I'm like, these people are driving through our neighborhood where the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. And our stop signs are not very far from each other. I said, if somebody hits somebody and I see it, and they try to say they didn't do it, and come and talk to me because I'm going to go and see what happened and address it, and they try to tell me that it wasn't that bad, that it's okay, that they should be all right, and the person in the car in front of them says, no, it's not, what should I do?
The right thing.
The right thing, exactly. And even if the person in the other car says, yeah, it's not a big deal, I have to let them deal with that part. But for me, I have to do the right thing. Even though they might say, yeah, you know what? That wasn't anything. We don't have to worry about it. But the person that got hit says, yes, we do. Guess what I'm going to do? Me and my dog are going to stay right there, and we're going to wait and help however we can. Because that's the right thing to do. I'm not going to push it off as if it were something that I did not see. Because I got other things to do. So I'm going to think about me and not the person that said, I need the police to come and help me. I'm going to let them deal with that by themselves. I'm going to just go and keep going and let them have to deal with that when I know I could do something about it. See, I'm not going to go and be selfish because I know that's going to impact somebody else in a negative way. But that's what happens to us when we're selfish. It impacts others. And here we see how Ananias, being selfish, impacted his wife. About 3 hours later, his wife came in. Not knowing what had happened, Peter asked her, tell me, is this the price you and Ananias got for the land? Yes, she said, that's the price. Peter said to her, how could you agree to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of the men who buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out also. At that moment, she fell down at his feet and died. Then the young man came in and, finding her dead, carried her out and buried her beside her husband. In great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. His wife, who stuck by her husband, fell to the same fate he did. It wasn't so bad. But should we be dishonest in order to show someone we support or love them? Should we? The best thing we can do for anybody to help them and for ourselves is to tell the truth. Because whether or not, again, you're not lying to men, you're lying to God. That's hard for us to do because we're all selfish. We all have that tendency. It's hard for us to be completely honest all the time because we like to think about us. See, being selfish separates us from God. We need to be united with God because when we're united with God, the Holy Spirit does what we can't. When we are united with God, when we're walking step by step with Him, the Holy Spirit's going to do what we can't. See, verses 12 through 16 say the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders among the people. All the believers used to meet together in Solomon's colonnade. No one else dared join them, even though they were highly regarded by the people. Nevertheless, more and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. And as a result, people brought the sick into the streets and laid them on beds and mats, so at least Peter's shadow might fall on them as he passed by. Crowds gathered also from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing their sick and those tormented by evil spirits, and all were healed. Again, when we're united with God, walking step by step in Him, the Holy Spirit does what we can't. Those miraculous signs and wonders weren't done by people. They were done by the Holy Spirit through people. Because we can't do any of those things on our own. The Holy Spirit can do things that make other people pay attention. And when they pay attention, we need to make sure we give credit to the one that credit is due. See, it also talks about the fact that there were all these people who, even though they supported them and were encouraged by them, they didn't want to join them. But there were many men and women who believed. See, the Holy Spirit was still able to speak to and convict hearts, even though those people didn't follow them everywhere that they went because they were scared of others. See, when we're united with God, the Holy Spirit can do what we can't. We just have to be obedient and leave the results to God. Because this is what happened. People were healed by just the shadow of Peter. How many of you would love to know that just you passing by someone allowed the Holy Spirit to reach into them and to heal them? Is it possible? Absolutely. Absolutely. Why? Because God is God and He can do things that we can't. But when we're united with God, those things are more than likely possible. Because the Holy Spirit can do what we can't when we're united with Him. In 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, it tells us, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love Him. If you're united with God, guess what? There's going to be some things that are going to happen that are going to blow your mind. Should it blow your mind? No, but it does anyways, doesn't it? Because we're people. God has so much more prepared for us than we could ever know. And if we're united with Him, He's going to be able to do those things through us. And He's going to get the glory. But we're going to be the ones that get joy from the fact that we were a part of something that God did. See, we cannot even conceive what God has prepared for us. But we can't do that if we're being selfish. Our selfishness has got to go. My selfishness has got to go. That's hard. Oh, that's hard. So let us be a church that recognizes, that confesses, and that repents of our selfishness. Let us be a church that recognizes, confesses, and repents of our selfishness. And that unites with God. Let us unite with God, not being selfish, so that the Holy Spirit can do what we can't. We can grow this church. We can invite people here all day long. But it's different when God grows the church, when the Holy Spirit is doing the work. So we need to be a church that's led by the Holy Spirit because we're united with God. And the things that are going to happen here are not happening because we can do it. It happens because we can't do it. And God, through the Holy Spirit, is doing it Himself. So being selfish has got to go. Because there's so much more that God can do when we just get ourselves out of the way. That's something I have to tell myself often. When we get out of the way, there's so much more that God can do in each and every one of us, and even in our church. Let's bow our heads in prayer, and we'll move into the Lord's Supper.